Welcome back to Budget and Bling, the series where we take the Commander Precons and we upgrade them either for a little or a lot. Today I want to take a look at Draconic Rage from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms and the Budget and Bling upgrades that I would make to make this deck immediately more competitive, and the video starts right now. Special thanks to our Patreon supporters who power our channel. Check out our Patreon for monthly giveaways, exclusive content, and even a starring role in our fan fight series. Link in the description below. Hello and welcome to the day. Thank you for spending your time with us. Welcome back to another episode of Jake and Joel Are Magic. I am Joel. Today we're going to cover Draconic Rage and the Budget and Bling upgrades that I would make to this pre-constructed Commander deck. But before we get into it, if you would, consider by the end of the video hitting that like button if you like it. Hit that dislike button if you don't. In this video, I'm going to show you the budget upgrades, meaning $9 or less, and the bling upgrades, meaning $10 or more, that I think would be a great fit for this commander. I'm also at the end going to tell you exactly what I would cut from this deck to make some of those additions. You know the deal. Comment below which card you think is going to be the most expensive card that I suggest would be great in this deck, and let's take a look at this commander. At the helm of Draconic Rage, we've got Vrondiss, Rage of Ancients, a green, a red, and 3 other for a 5/4 Dragon Barbarian with Enrage. Whenever Vrondiss is dealt damage, you may create a 5/4 red and green Dragon Spirit creature token with, when this creature deals damage, sacrifice it. So that's going to be on attacks or defense. If it deals damage while it's blocking a creature, you're going to have to sacrifice it. If it deals damage while it's attacking, obviously, you're also going to have to sacrifice it. And that's whether it deals damage to an opponent or another creature. Keep that in mind. The second ability there is whenever you roll 1 or more dice, you may have Vrondiss deal 1 damage to itself. That's going to be less applicable right now. I'm going to say less because we only have 1 set and some commander releases to pull from to find cards that will allow you to roll dice. We really want to be focused on ways that we can have damage being dealt to Vrondiss of our own control, and obviously we'll put as many good dice rolling cards in there as we can. There's a huge keyword missing from the text on this card. Take a look. What do you think it is? Ding, the answer is flying. The dragons that Vrondiss creates don't fly. They're 5/4 red and green dragon creature tokens with that ability. When they deal damage, you sacrifice it. So just be aware that if you're playing Vrondiss, it's not creating flyers. However, I'm still a big fan of this commander. Whether they're flying or they're running dragons, we are still creating a lot of power onto the battlefield, and it doesn't restrict it to only triggering once per turn. Anytime we have damage being dealt to Vrondiss, we can get a 5/4 red and green dragon creature spirit token that is for some reason bound to the ground. So strategies for this deck I'm going to lean into is attacking, is dragons, and ways to control how much damage is dealt to Vrondiss, so we're not just waiting for some damage to fly around. The first budget card I would recommend is Ebony Fly. This is one of the cards from the Precon decks of Adventures in the Forgotten Realms like Vrondiss, Draconic Rage, but it wasn't included in this deck. It's budget right now, but I don't think it's going to be budget for very long because this will be the only printing of it. And in my opinion, this artifact uncommon is one of the best cards to allow you to control getting dice rolls on demand. Ebony Fly is a 2-cost artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped. Naturally, it just taps for 1 colorless mana, but for 4, and that's a colon, so you can do it as many times in a turn as you have mana for, you roll a d6. Until end of turn, the artifact becomes an XX insect artifact creature with flying, where X is what you roll. But we don't really care about that. What we care about is the fact that for 4 mana, we can roll a die, allow Vrondiss to deal a damage to itself, and create a 5/4 dragon. That basically translates into we can create 5/4 dragons on demand for 4 mana. Obviously, that's limited by how much toughness Vrondiss has, but you know there are a lot of ways to give creatures indestructible, so I would definitely recommend Ebony Fly. Right now, it's only $1, but I don't think that price will hold for very long, so pick it up as a budget option right now. I love Steel Hellkite. Steel Hellkite's one of my pet cards. 6 mana for a 5/5 flyer. You can flamethrower it for 2 mana instead of just 1 red. It gets +1/+0 until end of turn. And at X, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X whose controller, meaning our opponents, when Steel Hellkite gets through and deals damage, was dealt combat damage by Steel Hellkite this turn. Activated only once per turn. I'm a big fan of it in this deck. I think it's a great replacement for some of the creatures that we'll go over at the end of the video that you could cut from the pre-constructed deck itself. Steel Hellkite's widely printed, widely played. It's $1. Pick yourself up a copy. You're going to love playing it. Crucible of Fire is a very fun card because dragon creatures you control get +3/+3. We are naturally creating 5/4 dragons with our commander, and so we are now creating 8/7 dragons with our commander. That sounds awesome. I don't care if they can only running dragons. That's all we can create, by the way, not flying. Ugh. Always love a good Anthem in a tribal deck. We're gonna lean the deck build towards tribal just because I think that's personally more fun. And so Crucible of Fire being in here is a auto include for me. 2 green, 2 other for Neath of the Dire Hunt, a 3/3 human warrior. Very interesting because she represents card draw. Whenever one or more creatures you control fight or become blocked, draw a card. That's excellent. And then at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can pay 3, either a red and a green and 2. And if you do, double target creature's power until end of turn, that creature must be blocked this combat if able. We're replenishing our hand when our stuff becomes blocked. We're forcing them to throw their creatures in front of our running dragons, so they're always going to have stuff to be able to block it. Neath is great in this deck, only $2, and I think definitely has a home here. Staff of Nin is a 6 mana artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, you get to draw an extra card, and you tap it to deal 1 damage to any target. We talked in the opening about being able to control Vrondiss's Enrage ability. Staff of Nin represents, hey, EOT before my turn begins. Tap Staff of Nin, deal 1 damage to Vrondiss, create a 5/4. Go to my turn. That is excellent. This is the kind of card that we want to be looking for. Cards that also offer other effects if possible or are good converted mana costs. Staff of Nin is not a great converted mana cost, but the ability to draw an extra card at the beginning of every turn is really going to help an aggro deck. So I would recommend Staff of Nin, only $2. Get it into this deck and start creating your 5/4 dragons without wings at will. Dragon Tempest, we have to talk about the text of it. Whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, it gains haste until end of turn. That's pretty useless in this deck, except for the other dragons that we will be running. However, that second body of text, whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to target creature or player, where X is the number of dragons you control. It doesn't care if those dragons fly, it just wants to count dragons and start firing off that much damage. For 2 mana, this is an enchantment that you should run in this deck. We're gonna run a lot of natural dragon cards in the deck already, and then that second ability, making our dragons do damage when they're coming into the battlefield. Huge fan of that. $2 for Dragon Tempest. As you can tell with Rhythm of the Wild, I want to be giving our creatures haste if at all possible. A good aggro deck playing a lot of flying dragons in the air wants haste so that we can just sling those dragons around and be doing a ton of damage every turn. Rhythm of the Wild is a great way to do that. It's going to keep our creature spells from being countered, which in the right meta can be very good. And then non-token creatures we control will get Riot, which means our dragons can come in bigger, or they can come in with haste. Obviously, it says non-token, so it's not going to count for Vrondiss's tokens that he's creating. But I'm a big fan of this card as a budget play regardless, just to be able to have all of your other creatures in the deck have haste or be bigger when they come into the battlefield, and keeping our creatures from being countered could be huge. $3 for Rhythm of the Wild. It's a really good enchantment in any aggro deck. I also really like War Room in this deck. I don't recommend a lot of lands, but Commander Legends had some of these cards that were beneficial the fewer colors you were playing, and in red and green, it could be nice to have a utility land with some card draw on it. You want to be playing stuff every single turn, as much stuff as you can, so you want to be ramping and you want to be drawing cards, because this is an aggro deck at its heart. We're trying to create 5/4s on the ground. We're trying to get Vrondiss to be creating a ton of power so that we can attack through and win that way. So paying 3 with War Room and tapping it, paying life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity to draw a card, could be really good since we're only paying 2. You know, for monocolor commanders, this is fantastic. For 2-color commanders, it's really good. And I think for an aggro deck, this is the kind of card that you want to find as a utility land. $5 for War Room, and I love card velocity, so I'm always going to put that into the deck. And speaking of card velocity, Toski, Bearer of Secrets is up next. A green 3 other for a 1/1 squirrel, can't be countered, and it's indestructible. It has to attack each turn if able, but whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. That's a creature, not a non-token creature. So Toski's ability is going to look at our 5/4 dragons that do get through, and we're going to get to draw a card every single time one of them punches a player. Big fan of this. $6 for Toski. Put this little squirrel in there to run alongside all of your runny dragons on the ground. I really can't seem to let this non-flying dragon thing go. Let's Let's jump into some Bling upgrades and start with Goblin Sharpshooter, one of my personal favorite creatures of all time. Doesn't untap during your untap step. Whenever a creature dies, you untap it, and you tap it to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. It can target Vrondiss, that's why it's in here. Plus, with the creature tokens dying whenever they deal damage, we're going to be able to untap Goblin Sharpshooter more than we would in the average deck. I think there's a ton of synergy with Goblin Sharpshooter in this deck. It's another way to EOT another dragon onto the battlefield. Tap Sharpshooter, target Vrondiss, deal 1 damage, create a dragon, go to your turn, untap, and you've got an extra 5/4 on the battlefield ready to attack. Sharpshooter's $11 in its cheapest printing. I definitely love that card in this deck. Xenagos, God of Revels. It's an aggro deck. This card is really good for aggro decks. It's 12 bucks, and that bottom text at the beginning of combat on your turn, another target creature, not non-token, just any creature you control gains haste. Love that. You already know I do. And gets +X until end of turn, where X is that creature's power. So one of our 5/4 dragons on the battlefield is turning into a 10/9 dragon that also has haste and is ready to deal a lot of damage. It's going to kill whatever creature blocks it for sure, most every creature, and if it gets through, a 10 punch is huge in Commander. It's great in an aggro deck. If you've never played Xenagos, get yourself a copy. Like I said, $12. You are going to love playing this. Now, Triumph of the Hordes. This is kind of a mean card. It's a $16 sorcery, and it says until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample and infect. If we can get a huge army up, enough to get damage across equal to the infect counters that any player needs to die, we could win for just 4 mana. Obviously, we will have needed to, create a huge board state, enough creatures to get through. But Triumph of the Hordes is basically just a 4 mana win condition, although it's pretty mean, it's very eye-rolly, and everybody's gonna go, great, you won with Triumph of the Hordes, cool. Regardless, for 16 bucks, it's probably worth putting in there just as a secondary win condition if you need that last-minute Hail Mary win. Goldspan Dragon at 5 mana, 2 red, 3 other, is a 4/4 flying haster, and whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, you create a treasure token, and it lets all of your treasure tokens tap for 2 mana of any one color instead of just 1 mana. Pretty new dragon here, pretty pushed dragon here. This is a play that I'm just like, okay, we're playing Dragon Tribal. Let's get out of the Vrondiss ability, and that, it's going to be great, but we don't have to completely focus on that. We can win by other means too. Goldspan Dragon is the first of a couple of dragons I'm going to recommend that will lead you to victory if you can get it onto the battlefield and get it attacking. $20 for Goldspan Dragon. It's still in standard and it's pretty widely played there, so maybe the price will go down in the future, but if it keeps being a huge EDH dragon, I have no doubt people will still keep paying to have it. Like Terror of the Peaks from M21, 2 red, 3 other for a 5/4 flyer. Spells your opponents cast that target Terror of the Peaks cost a lightning bolt to their face to cast, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. Look at that text. Whenever another creature, not non-token creature, Vrondiss's 5/4 dragons, when they come into the battlefield, they count. So, Staff of Nin, Goblin Sharpshooter, we target Vrondiss, deal 1 damage to Vrondiss. Vrondiss creates a 5/4 dragon. That dragon comes into play, deals 5 damage via Terror of the Peaks to any target that we want it to be. If we've got something like Darksteel Plate on Vrondiss and he's got Indestructible, that dragon can deal its damage to Vrondiss, creating another 5/4 dragon, letting Terror of the Peaks deal more damage, and so on and so on and so on. I think you can see where I'm going with this. Terror of the Peaks is fantastic in this deck, $21. I mean, these two with a couple of other artifacts, that's like a 4-card infinite token combo that would be really excellent in this deck. Old Gnawbone is also really excellent in this deck, brand new from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. 7 mana for a 7/7 flyer. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. That ability is busted. There are videos on the channel, shorts on our channel of combos involving Old Gnawbone. You're gonna want to run this dragon. It's one of the premier dragons, especially in a 2-color deck where green and red are all you're focused on. And I would say arguably this card goes into a 5-color dragon deck if that's what you're trying to do. $25 right now for this mythic legendary dragon. I love it. Put it in the deck. You're going to be creating a ton of treasure tokens. Ursus Incubator is one of Jake's favorite cards. I wanted to include it as a little shout out to the other half of the channel there. 3 For an artifact, as it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. Hint, we're choosing dragons. Creature spells of the chosen type cost 2 less to cast. Dragons are notoriously mana intensive to get onto the battlefield, so let's start doing some reduction. We've already got some cost reduction on dragons in the deck naturally from the pre-constructed version. Let's just add to it with Urza's Incubator. Urza's Incubator is $40. It's a pretty in need of a reprint card, but in a tribal deck, especially one where the creatures are so mana intensive, it is great. Great Hinge is a 9 mana artifact that costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. It taps to add 2 mana, you gain 2 life, and whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. What's there left to say about this card? It's fantastic. It's $44. The price reflects how good it is. It belongs in most creature-based EDH decks. It's just such a powerhouse. That reduction is huge. With just your commander on the battlefield, this only costs 4 to cast. It can immediately tap for 2 mana, and you're gaining life passively. Not huge, but you're never going to turn it down. Your non-token creatures entering the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it and allowing you to draw a card when that happens is absolutely huge. It's just bonkers. It doesn't trigger off of your token spirit dragons that Vrondiss creates, but arguably, if it did, that would be even more broken than this card already is. $44 for Great Hinge. Pick yourself up a copy if you've got the means. It is a fantastic inclusion. All right, I hope you commented down below what you think is going to be the most expensive card, because it's coming up right this second, and it's doubling season. $62 for doubling season. It's a 5 mana enchantment. You've seen it 100 times. If an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead. That's really the only piece that I even care about. The other part is great. If you're putting counters on a permanent, you put twice of those counters. But we're creating double 5/4 red and green dragon spirit creature tokens every single time Vrondiss takes damage. Oh my goodness, this card is ridiculous. It doubles our output. It's played, it's proven, it belongs in this deck. Okay, so let's talk about some of the cuts that I would make. These are all cards that are included in the pre-constructed deck that you would not miss, at least in my opinion, if you cut them to replace with any of the cards that we've talked about in this video. The first one is Demanding Dragon. It's a 5 mana 5/5 flyer. It's fine. When it ETBs, it deals 5 damage to target opponent unless that player sacrifices a creature. That sounds really good, but a lot of times a little 0/1 plant is going to be sacked. You're just going to have a 5 mana 5/5 flyer, and that sounds very vanilla. It's because it is. It's just very middle of the road. Any of the dragons, budget or expensive, that we talked about in this video are better than Demanding Dragon, in my opinion. I would also say you can cut Skyship Stalker for the same reason. 4 mana 3/3 flyer. It flamethrowers. You can give it 1 red mana to give it +1/+0 until in a turn. You can give it first strike, and you can give it haste. It's just not impactful enough in EDH in my mind. This is the kind of spell that I would rather be ramping on the turn I'm playing it, or playing some other ridiculous dragon. You know, Goldspan Dragon's only 1 more mana than this. I just don't like Skyship Stalker in EDH. I don't think it's impactful enough. If you just need a filler dragon, you can leave this in, but this would be one of the ones that I would cut for another stronger dragon. Ryle represents some cards in these Precon decks, and they're in every Precon deck. I just don't like their inclusion, and that's effects that happen once and they're kind of small. I get what they're doing here. This is deals 1 damage to target creature you control, it gains trample, fine, who cares, and it replaces itself. That's fine. That's a fine effect, but it's only going to happen once. And you know, we've already talked about things like Staff of Nin, things like Goblin Sharpshooter that are going to allow us to do this over and over and over again until our opponents use some removal to deal with that permanent. So an ability like this, especially one that's specific to the synergies of your commander, I would say look for permanents that do it, or look for cards with flashback or rebound so you can at least use them twice, because doing it once is cool, just not impactful enough. The next card I want to talk about is Shamanic Revelation. This is a draw spell for 5. Draw a card for each creature you control. In the right situation, this can be very good. A lot of times I've had this card just sit in my hand and not do anything because I didn't want to pay 5 mana to draw like 2 cards. I wanted to build up my board, build up my board, build up my board, and then inevitably something wipes it all off, and I've got this 5 mana sorcery in my hand that doesn't do anything. The second part of it, that ferocious to gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater, again, fine. I'm not really trying to play this deck to be gaining a lot of life. I want to be putting dragons on the battlefield and swinging. There's better ways to draw cards. You can cut Shamanic Revelation, in my opinion. Decree of Savagery was also included in this deck. I don't know why, though. This is better in a tokens deck. In a deck where we're going wide with a bunch of 0/1s or 1/1s, put 4 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. It just feels kind of win more, where we're creating a bunch of 5/4s. Do we really need to, at instant speed, make them 9 power? I mean, the only thing about this card that I like is that it's instant speed, but for 9 mana that can't really be reduced only with cycling to 6 mana, I just don't think that this card is worth it, and I would cut it for anything that's more synergistic. Barbarian class is a new card from AFR, and I just don't think it's impactful enough. Again, that level 2, whenever you roll 1 or more dice, target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains menace until end of turn. That's the part about this I like the best, because the first part, we can roll that many dice +1 and ignore the lowest roll. That's fine, but there's not a lot of cards for rolling dice right now. This is the kind of card that will get way better when there's more support for rolling dice in EDH. But until that time, I would put Barbarian class to the side, put it in a pile of cards where you're like, man, when there's more support for dice rolling, this is going to be very, very dope. And until then, I wouldn't include it in this deck. Now I'm going to suggest that we cut one of the dice rolling cards, Earth Cult Elemental. 6 mana, 6/6. Whenever ETBs, you roll a d20. Half of the time, each player is going to be sacrificing a permanent. Not quite half, but you know what I'm talking about. That combined with the fact that you only roll 1 die 1 time when the Earth Cult Elemental comes into the battlefield, and you're not really in colors that are going to be doing a ton of flickering, so you can't like have the creature re-enter the battlefield. I just don't think this is impactful enough. I'd rather run a dragon and get some of the dragon synergies that we're building in with cards like Crucible of Fire. So I would cut the Elemental, put it in the same pile as Barbarian class, and pull them out later when there's more support for die rolling, and that's a little bit more of a supported mechanic. 6 mana for Savage Ventmaw. It's just a 6 mana 4/4 flyer. Now, when it attacks, you do get to add 6 mana across 3 green and 3 red into your mana pool, and it doesn't leave the mana pool as the steps and phases end until end of turn. So it's kind of cool. If this is the kind of card that just gets aced or has to chump block, 6 mana, I want better return. This is, again, one of those dragons I would replace with something that's a little more impactful. I mean, I would rather have a 6/6 for 6 than this, really. I just don't really buy into the whole attacking add 6 mana as a ramp ability. Just get mana rocks or land onto the battlefield. I wonder how many people are going to yell at me for not liking Savage Ventmaw. Those are the upgrades and cuts that I would suggest for Draconic Rage. Let me know down in the comments which ones I forgot or which cards you think would be fantastic in this deck. Other than that, hit that subscribe button on your way out. It really helps out the channel more than you can know. And I'm tapped out. I'll catch you later.